Our next presenter is Benjamin+Ross, and before I introduce him, let me just say at the end, hopefully we'll have a few moments for some questions and some exchange. Benjamin is the historian of 6th Mount Zion Baptist Church in Richmond and has been since 1984. Under his leadership, the church is now listed on the National Register of Historic Places, the Virginia Landmarks Register, and in 2004, 6th Mount Zion became the only black church recognized by the city of Richmond as an old site and historic district. It has 2 Virginia State Highway markers. Benjamin+Ross is an advocate for preserving religious artifacts. He's spoken at conferences, museum programs, and church groups across the country on the importance of preservation. This year, 2012, marks the 200th anniversary of Reverend John Jasper, the legendary Virginia preacher and founding pastor of 6th Mount Zion Church. So Mr. Ross is with us today to speak on the life of Jasper and his extraordinary 19th century ministry. Benjamin, come and present for us.
Well, good morning. Good morning. And certainly I want to thank the Baptist+History and Historical Society again for having me speak before this conference. I had the pleasure of speaking before in 2005, I think it was, when we were down in Kentucky at Campbellsville University. Today, I'm going to talk about the Reverend John Jasper, who is the founding pastor of the 6th Mount Zion Baptist Church. And this year, 2012, is Jasper's 200th birthday. And so we are celebrating a lot in the life of Reverend John Jasper. The Reverend John Jasper was born a slave on the 4th of July, 1812. He was the last of 24 children born to his parents, Philip and Tina Jasper, on a plantation in Fluvanna County, Virginia. When he was a teenager, he found his way to the city of Richmond, and there he began working as a slave for many masters. But it was on the occasion of his birthday, he was down on Capitol Square in the midst of the 4th of July celebration when he had his religious experience. And in his words, the light broke from heaven above, and of all the sinners in the world, he felt that he was the worst sinner of all. And he wrestled for a number of days with those feelings until he finally came to the conclusion that he wanted to be a preacher. And so he set out his career as a preacher. He preached in many places. Primarily, he started out as a slave funeral preacher in those days. And he preached for many funerals across the city of Richmond and throughout the state of Virginia. He found his way after the war, and the Civil War was over in 1867. Jasper realized one of his greatest dreams, and that was to organize and have his own church. He had preached in a lot of churches throughout the state of Virginia, but he never had a church of his own. And so in September of 1867, after the war was over, he organized the 6th Mount Zion Baptist Church in what was described at the time as an abandoned Confederate horse stable that was located on Brown's Island on the shores of the James River. The James River flows through the city of Richmond and throughout the state of Virginia. This is an artist's conception of what that horse stable or shanty may have looked like. The members collected $7 on Saturday nights to pay him on Sunday mornings to preach. He was in his mid-50s when he organized 6th Mount Zion Church. And so we weren't here very long because he was already a very popular preacher and very well known. He started out with 10 members, but shortly, in 2 years' time, we purchased a building in another part of the city, and then Jasper had a church constructed in 1887. He contracted with a black man named George Boyd, who at the time was the only black man in the city of Richmond who had a license to build buildings. And he contracted with George Boyd, and this structure was built in 1887 for the Reverend John Jasper and the 6th Mount Zion Baptist Church. It was such a sensation that a newspaper article carried the day about the fact that the church had been built and the opening of the church. Jasper reached the zenith of his career in around 1887 when he preached a very unusual sermon called "The Sun Do Move and the Earth Am Square." It was a sensation. Everybody, not everybody, but many people loved the Sun Do Move sermon. It was just so titillating and unusual. A lot of people didn't like the Sun Do Move sermon at all because it didn't make scientific sense. The sun doesn't move at all. The sun is still and stable up in the sky. And the earth isn't square at all. We know that the earth is round. But he was able to locate a number of passages in the Bible that helped support his argument that the sun moved and that the earth was square. Joshua asked the Lord to stop the sun in the sky so that he could fight his battles. And the scriptures say that the sun stopped. And Jasper would preach, well, if anything that's stopped had to have been moving from the beginning. And then he would use things such as the four corners of the earth and the angels on the four corners of the earth and that sort of thing. And so he was able to put this very unusual sermon together. The sun do move, earth am square. The newspapers got wind of the sun do move sermon, and they began to promote John Jasper, and every time he would preach it. And so whenever he announced that he would preach the sun do move sermon, the newspapers would announce in advance that Jasper is preaching that sermon over at 6 Mile Zion Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock. Everybody knew it because they read it in the paper. And so everybody came, and in many instances, our church was packed with people who came to hear this unusual sermon. Now, nobody actually believed that the sun moved and the earth was square. They really came for the curiosity of it all. And indeed, Jasper was a very dramatic preacher. He would romp and stomp and hoop and holler, and women would faint and fall out on the floor. And in those days, it was described as bedlam, but it was in many ways a rollicking good time to hear Jasper preach the sermon. He had to preach it over 250 times that we know of, and once before the Virginia General Assembly, they requested to hear the Sun Do Move sermon. Yes, he was married 4 times.
Wow.
And some of the marriages were stormy, rocky marriages. But he continued to preach throughout his lifetime, and he was very much beloved by many, many people throughout the city of Richmond and across the state of Virginia. He was asked to minister to wounded Civil War soldiers, as many of the wounded soldiers were in Richmond or were brought to Richmond to recuperate at the hospitals there. He was one of a handful of black preachers that was given that authority to do that. He was given authority to marry slaves, another very unusual thing for a black preacher at that time, that given the authority to marry slaves. And in our church, we have the John Jasper Memorial Room and Museum, which houses the artifacts that we have been able to save over the years that belonged to him. His pulpit set, clothing, a hat, a coat that he wore, certainly his Bibles, his communion set, and many other things that ministers collect along the years of their ministry. We do have a highway marker that stands in front of the church. You see these markers really up and down the state of Virginia, and in many other states. They have on them about 100 words that pretty much describe the historical significance of where you're standing. And in our case, there are 2 markers. This is the one for Jasper, for the church. The Reverend John Jasper was born a slave in Blue Valley County on the 4th of July, 1812, organized the 6 Mile Zion Baptist Church congregation on September 3rd, 1867. This year, we are 145 years old, in a former Confederate stable on Browns Island. A nationally celebrated preacher. Jasper was known throughout the United States. A nationally celebrated preacher. He's best known for his 1878 sermon, The Sun Do Move, which he delivered more than 250 times upon invitation. Jasper died in March 1901 and is buried in Richmond in Woodlawn Cemetery. He was buried twice. He was first buried in 1901 when he died, and the church, he was buried in a cemetery in downtown Richmond. But 17 years later, the city of Richmond decided that they wanted that land for development, and they told everybody, if you got people buried in the cemetery, you got to come and get them. do something with them because the city was going to bury everybody all at once again. And so the members of the church ran out there and they dug him up and opened him up and looked at him and reburied him in another cemetery in the eastern part of the city of Richmond. I'm going to close with the Reverend John Jasper. We do have these free materials available for you. They're on display downstairs in the lobby near the elevator. Jasper died in March 1901, and on his deathbed, he uttered these words: "I have finished my work. I am standing at the brink of the river. I am looking across and waiting for further orders." Thank you.
All right. I'd like to know, Reverend Jasper was married 4 times. Were there any descendants? And if so, have you been able to locate any of them?
Sometimes it's called airing out the laundry. Well, now the first wife he married, they were slaves.
Right.
He was a teenager, and the girl was a teenager. And when her owners found out that she had married him, they took her away and sent him a letter saying that's over with and that's that. He married a second time to a woman named Candace Jordan, and they had a lot of children. He wrote it in his Bible. We have his Bible in our archives. And you know, the family page where you write, all these children were born in slavery, about 10 of them. But they didn't get along. And he went to the church and asked the church for them to be separated. And those were the children that he had. The second, the third, and fourth wife were widows. We do get a number of requests from people all over the country claiming to be descendants of John Jasper. And, I mean, unfortunately, I can't verify that they are descendants. I mean, give them what information we have to help them in their genealogy work, you know, and that sort of thing. But yes, we do get people.
I've just written an article on Andrew Marshall, the second pastor of the first African Baptist Church of Savannah, Georgia. But I noticed that Marshall started when he was very old, you know, maybe in his 50s before he began preaching. Is that right then for Jasper? I'm amazed at, you know, of course he preached funerals, but I mean to have his own church and be at such an older age. And then also he dies at the age of what, 89?
88.
What, 88? Well, this Andrew Marshall claimed he was 101 when he died, you know what I mean? and you know what I mean? And of course they kind of add to their years, it seems to me sometimes. But another thing that I just noticed with these black pastors, Marshall had no theological training whatsoever. And of course Jasper didn't either. They were both born, you know what I mean, in slavery and so on. But it's amazing that both men had such a remarkable career as far as and where did they get their, shall we say, education? Well, I guess they patterned it after other black pastors before them and so on. Is that right? I mean,
well, in the case of Jasper, you're correct. He did not have any formal education.
Not a formal,
He
yes.
did learn to read and write. A fellow slave taught him how to read and write. And in some of his writings, he does admit that it was extremely difficult for him to put words together and sentences together and things of that sort. But Jasper, after his conversion, he really took to the Bible. And of course, it's been written and said that he could quote the Bible back and forth and that sort of thing. So his education came by hook and crook and by learning and this, that, and the other. And that's how he pretty much was able to master preaching and just dealing with people. He could talk in dialect to some people, and then with others he talked good English, you know, that sort of thing.
Marshall did the same thing, just
Yes.
exactly there in Savannah. It's just rather remarkable the parallel between the two. And Marshall's church even had 2,800 members at one time and all of that. But I mean, just quite an interesting parallel, but never mind. Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Yes.
Follow up on Pam's question, if Jackson was such a committed person to the Bible, how did he reconcile some of the things that Pam's raised?
Oh, the marriages?
Family.
Well, I think I would just say put that on human factors.